Welcome to this Festival of Education keynote session, part of the annual Festival of Education, taking place online from the 16th to the 30th of June. This year's festival is free for all teachers and educationalists across education in the UK and beyond. This has only been possible thanks to the support of our incredible partners. A huge thank you to our headline partner, Pearson, our festival partners, BBC Bitesize, Cognita and Teach First, our literary festival partner, Bloomsbury Publishing, and our organising partner, Wellington College, the home of the Festival of Education. We'd also like to thank our incredible speakers. Over 200 leading educationalists and thought leaders will be providing sessions at this year's festival. On behalf of the audience and organisers, thank you. It's time to sit back and get set for our upcoming keynote session. If you wish to ask a question during this session, please head over to our Slido page to submit questions and vote for your favourites. Enjoy this Festival of Education keynote session.
Hello. I'm Chris Cook. I'm a contributing editor at Tortoise, and I'm here hosting today's keynote for the Education Festival. Today we've got Matthew Hood. Matt is the founder of the Oak National Academy, which is one of the remarkable success stories of the last year. Over the next hour, we're going to talk about a range of things, about not just the way things have gone, but where things are going to go, what things could have gone well and what things could go better. I'd be really keen to hear from you too. If you look on YouTube, lower down the page or at the side, you can see a live chat box. If you pop in questions there, I'll be monitoring them. And as long as they're basically civil, we'll have a go at putting some of those to Matt. I was hoping we could start off, Matt, by talking about really the beginnings of Oak. I guess it's worth starting by actually explaining what Oak actually is and where it is today. So I wonder if I could get you to quickly rattle through what it is you've built, what Oak is, and what it became.
So thanks for having me. Great to be here. For those who haven't come across Oak National Academy, we're effectively a national online school. We were set up in the Easter holidays of 2020, so right at the start of that very first lockdown. And we have about 10,000 lessons freely available to teachers, parents and pupils that cover a broad curriculum for 4 to 16-year-olds, pupils who attend schools in the mainstream sector, as well as pupils who attend schools in the specialist sector. It's free to access, and to date, pupils have taken part in about 130 million lessons. We're a grassroots organisation, so we were set up quite organically over that Easter holiday. Essentially, a kind of conversation started amongst a group of people, which grew and expanded and grew and expanded. In the end, we had about 40 teachers create about 180 lessons on a platform that we built in about 8 days. And we repeated that process over that first term. We then decided to keep our doors open for this academic year. First of all, actually, just to respond to those situations where pupils were moving in and out of their classrooms because bubbles were bursting in the kind of schools lingo. But then, things really started to heat up during the most recent lockdown when schools were sent home straight away after the Christmas holidays. And what we found actually is that the use of Oak National Academy has gone way beyond that original, let's help pupils to keep learning whilst they're at home, to cover things like reducing workload, personalising learning in a range of different ways, to support things like catch-up, as well as professional development and ongoing CPD for teachers.
So can I ask just to quickly explain what a lesson is in this system? So it's not just a tape, right?
Correct. So lessons have a number of different components that largely mimic what the evidence tells us is like a pretty good format for teaching a lesson in a classroom. They usually start with some kind of quiz or questions that are connected to things that the pupils have already learned, that activates prior learning. They then have a video with a teacher delivering what would normally be the kind of exposition, explaining and modeling part of a lesson. That's anywhere between sort of 10 and 20 minutes. There's then often some kind of independent task for the pupils to do where they go and consolidate and maybe practice particular skills. And then we wrap up with some questions about that lesson. Some people call these exit tickets or exit quizzes, those sorts of things, to check what the pupils know and don't know. And very recently, we've also actually added those quizzes across a particular unit. So as well as knowing about, where Mansa Musa went as he travelled across Africa, you can also do a unit quiz on the Mali Empire as a whole.
Right. I wonder, having explained how big the thing is you built, I wonder if we go back to the start now then. So that so there was nothing like this before, right? So we had, Teachers TV has been dead for quite a long time, right? Like we've not had a particularly national structure like this for a long time. And you sort of built it rapidly, you and a couple of mates. How did it fit together?
So the original kind of thinking was basically an attempt to answer the exam question. How do we keep pupils learning while schools, for the majority of them, are going to remain closed? Remember back that period of time, right? Schools had the close instruction a couple of weeks before the Easter holidays. Those first couple of weeks were very, very heavily prioritizing, the kind of wider well-being of the pupils and getting yourself organized. Easter holidays then hit. People had a little bit of a breather. And we were all looking to this summer term where we were expecting the pupils to be at home for the kind of the vast majority of it. And just in the network of people that I knew, and in particular David Thomas, who was the other founder, we knew of teachers for a variety of reasons who were doing a pretty good job of this remote education business, right? They were maybe computer science teachers themselves, or they were a bit techie and a bit nerdy, or they happened to be in a school that had really pushed on its kind of thinking on technology. And, all we tried to do was say, well, look, can we get enough of these teachers together who are doing a good job for their own kids? We'd seen in those first couple of weeks when schools had been closed, different teachers putting their videos online and doing those sorts of things. Can we gather them up and just make their lessons available for anybody? The wonders of technology mean that if you're going to do an asynchronous lesson, remember, these are all asynchronous lessons, they're not live lessons. If you're going to do an asynchronous lesson and record it for your 30 pupils, why not record it for, a few million pupils? And some of our most popular lessons have been viewed by, hundreds of thousands of pupils. And I just happen to know enough of the people who then knew enough of the people. And we were in this moment where, I think it was a very similar period of time, if not a few days before, the kind of Royal Volunteering Service had just opened, right? And 400,000 of people had signed up overnight. Everybody just wanted to help. We managed to get this group big enough so we had, yes, of course, lots of teachers and the support from their schools and school trusts, but we also had some developers, and we also had some communications experts, and we also had some operations experts and project managers. And very, very quickly we got them working together. And like I said, in that first 8 days, the task was 180 lessons online by the Monday of the term back. And then before you know it, someone's like, well, it'd be great if you could do an assembly. And then my husband trained to teach with somebody who went to school with the Archbishop of Canterbury's son. And so we thought, who would be really good for an assembly? The Archbishop of Canterbury would be good. Can we get in touch with that person? And then can they ask their dad if they'll do an assembly? The dad just happens to be the. And then when the Archbishop of Canterbury did it, well, then, the next person wanted to do it, and the next person wanted to. So you sort of momentum builds and breeds momentum. And then before you know it, we had, we did about 20 million lessons in that first term.
And so you from a Upstanding Start, you put this thing together, and it's a remarkable sort of confluence of material and skill put together. But it was legally part of the Reach mat. Is that right? It bodged together a sort of structure, right, within Reach. Is that right?
Yeah, so again, sort of weird bits of skills and experience from previous roles. So this is my second startup, effectively, and one of the things that's really important in startup organisations is that you get your some like legal and compliance things that can trip you up later down the line sorted very, very quickly. I used this incubation model, albeit on a much more thoughtful and drawn out timeline before. I knew that Ed Vanker knew and understood this model, and
Ed is the head of Reach, you should say.
Yeah, he's the head of the chief executive at Reach Foundation, which is the kind of sister charity, as well as the founder at Reach Academy Felton. And we needed to buy microphones and cameras to send to the head teachers very quickly. And so you've got to figure out quite quickly how you get a bank account in place, because you've got to pay for things, but the appropriate governance around the money associated with that. We need to pay some freelancers, and you've got to stay the right side of the law on those things. So this kind of incubation arrangement was the swiftest and most sensible. And so, yeah, we tucked ourselves inside of the Reach Foundation, who've been incredibly generous hosts for the past year, and it wouldn't exist without them.
And there's a critique more broadly of lots of things that have happened across the public services, really, about how, I don't know if you remember, there was a long run of concern about Kate Bingham's appointment, and then that's all sort of dried up since it went quite well. But do you think, looking back, there's a sort of, do you think you could have done things better to sort of make it feel more open? Or do you think, actually, you know what, we were moving at speed, we built a good product, that's what matters?
So, look, there are definitely always things that you can think of and do better. I actually think the legal and governance arrangements that we put in place were the best available ones at the time. There was just no way in 8 days that you can establish a not-for-profit organization. It just takes longer than that to do it. So tucking yourself in, we definitely could have set up a company in that amount of time, but that would have been complicated and probably wouldn't have had the appropriate governance. So on that front, yes. I suppose the reflection back from me is that what happens when you do something that is organic and grassroots like this is you just, there were things flying around. Does anybody know somebody who does this? Does anybody know someone who teaches that? And you end up it being, you said it earlier, sort of you and your mates. Well, the group went beyond me and my mates, but in the first instance, right, this was just people knew. And you end up with a not particularly diverse group of people, in particular in those first few weeks, from a group of schools that isn't that representative of the system as a whole. And actually, between our kind of first genesis, that first term, and our the way we've operated for the past year, making our tent bigger was a really big priority for us. We've gone from about 40 teachers to well over 300, from a small handful of curriculum partners, the people that we work with on lessons, to a much broader range of schools across the country, subject associations, like other national centres of excellence in particular subjects and disciplines. We probably could have thrown the doors open a little earlier than we did, and been a bit more thoughtful about that process. But we had 8 days. We didn't have a chance to interview every teacher, for example, that worked with us. Just like, you want to teach some maths? Brilliant. Yes, we're looking for someone to do, algebra. Here's a microphone, get recording. So, an interesting rub between being grassroots and being nimble and quick and doing things that are appropriate,
And you've got an association with United Learning and ARC in particular. Is that comes out of that first stage? Is that right?
So are you going to test me here on all of our curriculum partners who are around the table on the first one? I'm going to avoid that game because I'm definitely going to forget somebody and get in trouble. ARC were fantastic and did a huge amount of our maths curriculum. United Learning done a huge amount of our science curriculum. As I said, as we've expanded the number of subjects and lessons, we work with the Association of Design and Technology teachers. They do our D&T curriculum. The National Centre for Excellence in Computing, which Raspberry Pi Foundation is a big part of. They do our computing curriculum. So we've really tried to broaden and look outwards to a really broad range of curriculum partners and the teachers that work with them.
Okay, and one of the things that's striking about it is you've got government funding fairly early on as well, and it was, they basically recognised you're doing this thing that the system needs, and was it that blunt, right? Was it just a check through the door? one of the things I think is not intuitive if you're an outsider is why this thing costs money, particularly to run, right? There are only a few of you. There's only, you're getting the material for free from the teachers. What is the cost here?
Yeah, so any time that any public money, in my experience, is being spent, the process is reasonably robust. We had to go through, although the grant was awarded under kind of emergency COVID legislation, we had to go quite a lot of process to answer exactly the sort of questions you've done, like line by line, what are the costs associated with this? Lots of them actually, like big learning points for me. My background is in education. I'm not a technologist by any stretch of the imagination. And actually lots of the costs come down to technical things. So our hosting and bandwidth costs, so just the costs at market rates, if we were to have paid market rates over the year, we didn't, because we, again, like lots of pro bono and goodwill into the project, would be something like £3.5 million. Because we're just the sheer volume of content that we are streaming. The way that works is like organizations that want to stream that content pay a provider who hosts it and does that bit of the process for them. So just those hosting costs alone are, really, really significant. The first term, again, in that kind of first genesis, we didn't pay any of the teachers. They were obviously being paid by their schools and school trusts, but we didn't, provide them with any additional resources. So they did that voluntarily. But when we went into our second genesis, so the recording of the 10,000 lessons over the summer period, we paid all of the teachers for their time. They were working in their holidays. That was entirely, appropriate. We had a lot of PhD students who were doing some of the quality assurance checks. We made sure we paid them. We actually had some students doing video editing for us. We paid them. Just the technical and production costs of making the content, not insignificant. But that said, the total cost of this project since our inception is still roughly the same as the average size secondary school. So in the grand scheme of the budget, these are, of course, public money, should be thoughtfully and appropriately spent and carefully considered, and you don't want costly running away. But in the grand scheme of the amount of money that we spend on education, Oak National Academy is a relatively small slice of that pie. Again, roughly the same size as the average secondary school. When it comes to staff, like roughly the same number of people as the average primary school. Right.
Do you think that the technical thing is the achievement, or is it what is it when you think the thing we've cracked that hadn't been done before? What's the big achievement of Oak?
I think, I'm only speaking from my own personal experience here, I think where I've struggled in the past in other education roles with education technology is that you often either get a big technology with a little education, or a big education with a little technology. And there is something about the balance between those two things. And actually, it's really hard to do. The groups of people with expertise in those two different domains just think and often work very differently to each other, and getting them to work really closely together is really difficult. And effectively our CTO is a former teacher who is able to code and do all of those things. And so he's got this very unusual skill set about being able to translate those two things across each other. So getting the balance between them is really, really important. You can often take yourself down a road of massively prioritize motivation, gamify the whole thing, hook the kids in, make it the most engaging thing in the world, but you forget about the cognition that's required to actually deliver learning, or equally, well, this is just about them learning stuff and it's so dull and dry that they never bothered to click on in the first place, particularly when they've got all of those other distractions around. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, we could have moved quicker here. We still are not totally comprehensive on subjects, although we have over 20. I think the second thing is it became a bit of a one-stop shop. I think schools want to know, yes, it's great that you've got English, maths and science, but they also want a broader range of subjects, and for the school to buy in wholesale, that was another really, really important feature. The third one was just accessibility. No logins, very, very easy to get to. You can find the lesson very, very quickly and you can get going. There's not lots of sort of trip ups and road barriers in the way for parents on those things. And then the last one is just like reducing workload for teachers. If you just make the thing, a helpful augmentation to the hard work that teachers do, then they're going to keep using it.
So I'm really interested about what you say about education technology in particular, because I think historically, and I oversimplify dramatically, but ed tech has been associated really with sort of quite progressive views of education, and there's always been a sort of you could work out whether someone likes group work if they're a big enthusiast for ed tech, right? I feel that's a fair summary of roughly where we were, and I wonder if you feel like the mood music around this stuff has changed. I would say whether basically it was easier to get proggy teachers to do lessons at the beginning, or what do you feel like you might have moved the dial a bit about how people see technology in schools?
So I think your analysis is broadly right, and I certainly would have considered myself before this project towards the more skeptical end about some of the promises of education technology. And if given, X amount of money pre-pandemic, would I have spent it on education technology? Probably not. I'm trained to be a teacher in the generation where we spent, I don't even know how much, a lot of money, eye-watering amounts of money on interactive whiteboards that I don't think made a significant difference, right? And I think that the conversation has been playing out. I think that it's a really good thing that carefully thought through sequence curricula have increasingly, not just by Oak, but a range of organisations, been brought to the fore, and people are getting a better balance between these two important considerations. What do we know about motivation? What do we know about cognition? And how do we bring those two things together? I suppose the reason that I am more evangelist, I think, than I have been before about education technology isn't because I think it's the silver bullet that's going to magically close inequality gaps and improve outcomes for all pupils. It's because I think the pandemic has fundamentally changed the extent to which having a connected device is an access issue in the UK, in the same way that going to primary school for girls is in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. We are not used to having a challenge, even a debate about, a conversation about access to education for pupils in England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, right? We take it for granted that all pupils can access education, and our conversation is always about quality. And I'm not sure you can credibly say that you can access education on the same terms as your peers coming out of this pandemic in 2021, as maybe you could have made the case pre-pandemic. I think reflecting back, I was maybe wrong, and actually I couldn't have made that case as well as I thought. But I certainly think, if you don't have a device that is connected to the internet and you can afford the data, I think there are access issues. And let's be clear, like, not all devices are equal here. Like, pupils engage with Oak National Academy lessons for twice as long on a laptop as they do for a mobile device, right? So not all devices are equal. My evangelism for education technology is because I think it is an access issue. I still think teacher expertise is the thing that makes the difference on the quality side.
Do you think, that's really intriguing. Do you think going forwards from here, that's still going to be true? Because obviously you understand why it was a major access issue if during the last year. But do you think going forward, do you think either that it was a bigger issue than people like you or I, in fact, would have appreciated before, or and do you think it's a continuing issue? Has the calculus changed in the real world because of this? I mean, I guess I'm also asking you what you think Oak is going to do in the next few years, right? So is online learning going to be part of where we are?
So schools have been forced to, because of the pandemic, take a significant number of steps forward down the kind of education technology route that I think would have taken them lots more time and with lots more variability had the pandemic not existed. And the comparison I draw, and there's a piece of research by the LSE which looked at commuter behaviours in London following a tube strike. And what this piece of research found is that tube strikes are actually good for commuter efficiency, because about 1 in 20 people find a faster way to work and stick with it. I think that schools are in a similar position. I don't think we don't need schools anymore, and everyone's going to learn digitally and, on and on and on and on. 19 of 20 things in schools are done the way they're done for good reasons. We're going to maybe find 1 in 20 things that we might do a little bit differently. And those things, I think, will be on the, to a large extent, on the kind of technology side. I think we're more efficient at sending homework out. We're more efficient at quizzing and identifying gaps amongst pupils. We're going to be more efficient at kind of personalising lessons. So send a kid an Oak lesson where they've got a particular gap and have them fill that gap. Like, those things are really fundamental parts of education. And if they stick, we don't really know at the moment, right? But let's see if most schools stick with some of the systems that they have made massive progress on during the pandemic. In order to access those systems, you need a connected device. I think it is credible to say that, pre-pandemic, maybe this wasn't such a big issue, but I think it is increasingly a significant one. And it's a complicated one, right? Like, Oak National Academy is 0 rated. So there's no data charges associated with accessing any of our lessons. That's in place for the duration of the pandemic, but it's not indefinite. Well, it's not indefinite because there's issues around net neutrality. So there's a big question about what do you allow list? Like, what do you let through with no data charges, and how do you decide? These are kind of big questions that need lots of careful thought and consideration, because get them wrong and there are some significant unintended consequences.
So do you think that can I ask in sort of 5 years' time, if you had to get, I appreciate this, I'm asking you to stick a finger in the wind slightly, but based on what you see teachers have been doing, say, this term with Oak's materials, what do you think the stuff that's sticking is? What do you think the stuff they're going to keep doing is?
So we have about 30,000 teachers a week at the moment coming onto the platform and using the lessons and resources. We're not in the numbers that we were. At the height of the most recent lockdown, we had about 2.5 million pupils a week. We're nowhere near those numbers, but they're still in the hundreds of thousands. There are broadly 3 things that I think teachers are doing that now with Oak National Academy resources and others that they maybe weren't doing before. The first group are all about kind of workload reduction. Everything from not designing and creating everything from scratch, taking what's there and adapting and improving it, through to like really mundane things like cover lessons. I mentioned this earlier. There's nothing worse than waking up 6 a.m. You've got a banging headache. You've got to figure out what your 5 classes are going to do for the day. And this internal moral dilemma of wanting to do a good job, both for your pupils and for the poor teacher who's got to cover your lessons, and feeling like all you want to do is down that lemsip and get back to bed as quickly as possible, right? Like, there's a real internal struggle. And, we've all been to school. Cover lessons are never the most productive hour in the calendar. Actually, if you can send the teacher that's covering your lesson a lesson in a box, and there's a teacher explaining the thing that the kids need to do next, and there are questions and worksheets all pre-prepared, like big reductions in workload there. And that's one of the things that teachers tell us time and time again. The second thing is about this kind of personalisation question, being able to identify gaps and then target the lesson that a particular pupil needs directly at them. They're struggling with Pythagoras theorem. That's okay. Do this lesson at home. You're struggling with something slightly different. That's okay. Do that lesson at home. Again, I don't think we're quite there yet with the kind of magical, everybody gets taught a different lesson every single day. But the extent to which we're able to personalize has improved. And then the third thing is about broadly continual professional development, but in a very passive and general sense. When I trained to be a teacher, it was always useful to be able to watch other teachers teach. And it was more useful to be able to watch teachers teach the subject and vague year groups that I taught. So I'm an economics teacher. I taught 14 to 19-year-olds. So watching economics being taught to that group, more useful. But what I could never do, and because timetables just don't allow it, is watch a teacher teach the thing that I'm about to teach. And being able to say, right, how am I going to explain the credit creation multiplier? How should I approach that? Where should I start? What should I do differently? Being able to just watch another teacher and get the transcript of the lesson of them doing that, I think is incredibly useful. We've now got a group of video lessons on our site, particularly for trainee teachers, where this starts to get a bit meta. So we've got a geography lesson, and then we've got the teacher who taught the geography lesson breaking down what design choices and questioning choices they made in that lesson. So you can, as a trainee, you can watch them deconstruct the lesson. So, lots of trainee teachers this year have been watching OAK lessons and then with their tutor getting around a table and saying, what did you see? What could you do differently? Why did they do it that way? So there's this sort of professional development use case for just having an example. Not the best lesson in the world. We're not saying it's perfect. Like, these things were made at pace by some really great, dedicated, hardworking teachers. But there just is an example now of just about everything. And that's useful. That's useful in a range of ways.
Can I ask, so one of our questions from our listeners, from J West Anderson 8, asks, how do you measure what students were learning and how did that compare to an average of the full year? I.e., does this work? And I think if I can add to that as well, I'm interested in whether there's such a thing as a teacher is good at teaching online with OAK resources, or whether the fact that you're all using the same rough bucket of stuff means that actually the difference between a good teacher and a bad teacher is quite limited as well.
Great. Let me take that in multiple parts. So we don't collect any personally identifiable information about any individual pupil. So the sorts of kind of tracking that would be required in order to make the assessment at the individual or small group level about whether this works or not, it isn't something that we're able to do. But we have a data warehouse. We're well over about 2.5 billion data points in there now. Everything from where people have been clicking, selecting things, questions that they got right and wrong, how long they were on the site, what device they were on the site for, a kind of rough geography for them. We've got lots of data about what has just happened over the past year. And what we've recently started to do, and very, very excited about doing, is getting quantitative researchers into that data and asking some of the questions that you've posed. Those of you familiar with kind of quant research and education will know the National Pupil Database. And what organizations can do is get a license to get the National Pupil Database and then do research on it that gives us insights. We're not as big or complicated as the National Pupil Database, but we're trying to open up some of that data, again, albeit with the right protections and anonymities in place, to help answer some of those questions, like does it work or not? And we're too early at the moment on that front. But like I said, we've got some interesting insights. Pupils engage for half as long as on a mobile phone as they do on a laptop or tablet. We know at the moment that pupils are engaging in lessons in Bolton at about 3 times the rate of anywhere else. So there's a very high correlation between COVID cases and OAK usage. We get some interesting early insights about where bubbles have burst, because we suddenly see an increase in uptake in a very particular town or part of a town. On the point about quality, again, difficult to make judgments about quality because we only have proxies, right? Like learning is very, very difficult for us to measure. But we do see some variation in things like lesson completion rates between different teachers. And our quality assurance processes have tried to identify some of the things that we think these are all bets. The literature on remote education is really, really thin. But things that we think, based on our own data, make the difference for quality for the pupils. And back to my previous point about motivation and cognition, they tend to focus on the motivation side rather than the cognition side. We think we know what a good lesson looks like in a classroom. We've replicated lots of that in an online classroom, that's fine. But the thing that you don't have as the teacher in an online lesson are lots of the tools that teachers rely on to drive motivation to the particular tasks inside of a school. You don't have the group effects, right? Like you don't have 30 people sat next to you all doing the same things. Humans are sheepy in their behavior. Like we tend to do the things that other people are doing. You don't have that effect. I mean, you don't have a room with a door that they can't leave. You don't have TikTok pinging in the background on your interactive whiteboard telling you to go and look at some other interesting thing that's going on. So our teachers at Oak have had to think about ways to continue to ensure pupils are motivated and therefore attend to the lessons that we're delivering. And we've had to be a bit creative with that.
Can I ask about that? I mean, what have you done that's helped to sort of keep people engaged? What are the changes you've made?
So one of them is just like a very, very clean interface with no distractions. We don't have any advertising or things popping up or pinging up anywhere in our classroom. It's very, very clean. And you'll notice that our teachers use something called pause points. If you've ever done one of our lessons, our rule of thumb, again, it's a rule of thumb, is that you shouldn't really be doing any talking for more than about 2 minutes without some kind of pause point that triggers either a thought process, a writing down of something. With our really little 4 and 5 year olds, get them to scream something at the screen. What's 2 + 2? They all shout 4. They often think they're in a real lesson and don't quite realize that it's asynchronous, which is super cute. So our teachers use a lot of pause points. We also encourage them to, I describe this as being, and I get a decent amount of criticism from this from the trad sections of the education debate, but we encourage them to up their Blue Peterness down the line. You can't get away with being the stereotype, patches on elbows, sort of droning on. The kids just switch off, and that comes through in the data. So like upping some of your Blue Peter, interrupting yourself very frequently to make sure the pupils are with you, very clean interface with no distractions. It's those sorts of things that we've tried to do to maximize this our ability to motivate the pupils to attend to what we want them to learn about.
And that's as a former TV reporter, I find that sort of intriguing, because I don't know if you've ever gone back and looked at like a 1960s news broadcast, but they're basically unwatchable. And they're basically unwatchable because they rely on a person looking into a camera and speaking continuously for half an hour basically. And they have used to run these Fat for Educationists. On the day of the Robbins reports, they had this special program with Robin Day interviewing Lord Robbins, the author of this thing proposing the expansion of higher education. And it is just unbearable. Like you just cannot concentrate on it. And actually, the transition from in-person to online is there'll be teachers who are probably who are really good in the classroom who are terrible online. Whose personal charisma comes through in a different sense. Do you think you're going to find? I mean, when you serve in the future, when you're sort of serving lessons, are you going to have to sort of say, well, actually, we know this lesson is really good from the diagnostic tests, and we think this one's quite bad for the diagnostic test?
So we have since the get-go and have continued over this year to put a whole load of things in place to make sure that the lessons are as good as they can be. That starts with finding a curriculum partner who's got expertise in a particular area of the curriculum, goes on to reviewing that curriculum and getting lots of outside input into it. We then do inset for the teachers. So we train them in a whole range of different things that they need to do. They produce a mock lesson. They then start producing lessons, and there's a range of quality assurance things that go on. And then on our platform, when you go on lessons, there's a little magnifying glass in the bottom right, which allows people to give feedback on the lessons. We have a team of people who are looking at all of that feedback, and either post-production in most cases, or occasionally a re-record is required, and we're doing that over that period of time. None of the teachers who are with us think that that everything that they did was superb and perfect, right? Like we did 10,000 lessons in 3 weeks. Like it was rapid. And even in your classroom, when you're teaching day to day, you have good days and bad days, good lessons and bad lessons. And teachers are wonderful in their continued appetite to want to do the thing better. Nobody is sat here thinking that their maths lesson that could have been better, that's been watched by 200,000 kids, wasn't worth a re-record or a post-production edit. The quality of this really matters, and matters as much to them as it does to us.
So Sharon, who teaches in a British international school in Delhi, says, she's sort of saying, well, actually, these days with this technology, we could differentiate lessons as well. So you could have different lessons for the same content or skill could be run in different ways, perhaps so you can effectively have within one class sort of streaming, for want of a better word, or differentiation. Is that something you've done much of, or?
Again, this is all a question of balance for me. I want schools to have, and I think it's important that schools have, and the school that I'm the chair of governors, it is important to them that they have, because it's important to me that we have, a really carefully thought through, ambitious curriculum for our pupils. We have thought really hard about what we want them to know and be able to do. We have selected that knowledge, and we want them to move through that curriculum over time, becoming ever more worldly and ready for whatever it is that life throws at them next. And that includes thought and said, and it includes painted and danced and sung and all of those other things as well. And so when it comes to personalizing, what I want to be able to do is make sure that I am able to keep those pupils moving through that ambitious curriculum together, so they get to those endpoints and outcomes at the same time. But I know that along the way, they're going to make different levels of progress in different lessons, depending on the extent to which they've understood. And I think technology are a really helpful augmentation of those moments where pupils might need a bit of extra, and they might need to revisit something or do something a little more slowly. You can rewind the video and listen to the explanation again if you didn't quite catch it the first time. I do that all the time. I'm watching your news reports and I'm like, I don't quite understand that techie thing he said there, and I rewind it, right? Like the ability to do that is really helpful, and it's particularly helpful for pupils with additional needs. We have had some really interesting feedback from organizations like the National Autistic Society, who actually believe that for lots of their pupils that they work with, actually lockdown's been really good. They've been able to much better manage the amount of social interaction that the pupils have had, and give a dosage, for want of a better word, that's suited to the individual pupil. And if that means some of it is online with an Oak National Academy lesson, and some of it is in person, and they're building up the in person over time, but it's not 5 hours all in one go, that's a really good thing. So yes to personalization, but a kind of pupils will just follow their own interests, and we don't need a curriculum. That's where we would part ways.
Yeah, I'm a family friend of ours, and has really enjoyed lockdown. Not because he's basically a kid who has slight dyslexia, and it just in every lesson it just takes him slightly longer to follow the lesson plan, and so he's gone from struggling a little bit at school to basically being ahead of the curve now, because he's had best part of a year of being able to go and look up the lessons he's had and make sure he understands all the bit. And I sort of feel like that's one of the opportunities, I think, maybe underdiscussed is like assiduous kids who struggle a little bit on the edges of lessons. Yeah,
and a couple of days after our mainstream curriculum launched, our specialist curriculum launched as well, because there's two things here, right? One of them is, how do you make lessons for pupils in mainstream schools as inclusive and as accessible as possible? that including things like captioning everything, British Sign Language for some of the younger pupils. Again, all generously donated, right? Like the ITV signing team, who suddenly weren't making signing on their TV programs, rocked up and signed our lessons for us, right? Like, just like another like lovely, people leaning in. They just knocked on our door and were like, hey, could we sign some things for you? We're not doing any TV at the moment. So there is a piece about inclusivity there. The best bit of feedback we had in that first term was a parent getting in touch with us and saying, will you just ask the teachers to not say at the start of the lessons, hello year 4, welcome to our lesson on X today. Can they just say, this is a lesson on X today? And it was just like brilliant. Like, we don't need to say hello year 4. It's just what teachers tend to do. But what that meant was the kid who was in year 5 or year 6 who had to go back and did the year 4 lessons, you immediately encounter a motivation challenge, which turns into a cognition challenge because they think that they're doing, baby lessons or whatever that might be. So there's that doesn't exist. And, now we're currently working in 3 prisons. The lessons have been listed to get into 3 prisons. And we've got prisoners in their cells who are doing Oak National Academy lessons. Again, all benefited from, this isn't for 11-year-olds. This is just algebra, and it's where you should be in your curriculum.
Do you think that just looking forwards, can I ask about what Oak's going to be? So you've had in terms of finances, you had this slug of cash from the government to get you sort of set up and running. What happens now? When does that run out? What happens next?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we committed a year ago to continue to operate for another academic year, so September, and as things currently stand, like that's our current runway. We're still working on what the future looks like for Oak National Academy. We've done lots of work surveying and speaking to teachers and school leaders. We've done lots of work, as I talked about earlier, looking at all of those different use cases. Is this something that's useful for the system? Do people want this to continue? And the overwhelming majority of teachers that we've spoken to, who are using it, want it to stay open. Not least because we're not quite out of the woods yet on the pandemic, and the importance of maintaining a backstop should things take a more challenging turn, I think, is unlikely. I hope it's unlikely, as does everybody, but it would seem folly to exit from having that backstop before we're absolutely sure that it's needed. So lots of appetite for Oak to stay open, and complicated how you make that work. As I mentioned to you earlier, the at market rate hosting and streaming costs would be about £3.5 million. This requires a kind of organisation structure and funding that meets a number of criteria, and it's not easy to get it to meet all of those different criteria, all in one go. Should this be a charity? Should it be a part of the public sector? Should it be a business? Should it close? Like all of those options, we've been looking at and trying to find a way through, but it's not straightforward.
I mean, it's so £3.5 million is obviously more than I have, but it's like 150 quid a school, something like that, right? It's not a lot of cash for the state system to absorb.
Yeah, I mentioned to you earlier, this is about the same number of staff as the average primary school, about the same cost as the average secondary school. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a significant amount of money, and there is lots of appetite in the system for keeping this open and making these resources available for teachers. My school has wholesale moved to providing Oak lessons for cover. If I have to tell the head at my school that that's no longer going to be an option, I'm going to get in some serious bother with her. But how you make that work and simultaneously meet all of the various legal and contractual and contract awarding requirements, it isn't simple.
Can I ask about, so the Schools Week reported recently, there was one of the plans you're looking at going forward was turning into a sort of profit-making company. And I think their particular concern was about the staff of Oak being shareholders in this new profit-making company. So I think the thing that some teachers took from that was that the things that they had perhaps given, particularly in those first 8 days, might become, sold off basically.
Yeah. So one of the options that we looked at was the kind of legal structures of social purpose companies. You'll be familiar with lots of these. They pop up, some slightly more genuine than others. There are effectively two challenges to address. One of them is this sustainability point, right? Like, how do you fund those ongoing running costs? And ideally more, right? Because you want to invest in the thing and continue to make it better. But in a governance structure that works. One of the things that a social purpose company is able to do is it's able to access investment from big society capital type social investors who want to do good in the world but think that private money is the way to do it. The challenge is, if you take a look at that model and try to make it work, you have to decide who owns the thing. Because businesses have to have owners. And at the moment, we're a charity, so we have trustees. So you want to access that private money, have to be a social purpose company. If you want to be a social purpose company, somebody has to own it. We've looked at a whole bunch of different things there, but it's, again, very difficult because of that grassroots nature of the thing to decide who that is. An organization did our brand for us pro bono. We've had some pro bono lawyers and we've had some pro bono support from the hosting companies. Like, should they get a stake? What about all of the teachers who made the stuff? What about the people QAing it? There just isn't an easy answer to this question to sort of who owns this public asset that's created during this very unusual period of time. And at what point do you point and say, yeah, well, it was that person or that person or that person? Like, the answer is it was all of these people. So unfortunately, that avenue just doesn't work, because whilst it solves your sustainability problem, it doesn't solve your governance problem. Similarly, you can say, well, we will continue to be a charity and we're not going to charge anybody for anything. And, that solves your governance problem. But I've got to pay a hosting bill of a few £100,000 every quarter. Where am I going to get the money and resources to do that? And so sustainability and governance have been rubbing up against each other. We don't have a solution yet. And we're going to continue to keep looking for one. I think we'll get there, but we're just not quite there yet.
I mean, fundamentally, everything becomes easier if the government just says, this is, the cost of like a cover teacher for a day for an average school. We can actually have cover lessons for every school. Is that right? So, if the government steps in, you sort of resolve a lot of the sustainability questions, and then it becomes a pure governance question about who runs this.
On all of these options we've looked at, it tends to be you can solve one problem or the other problem, and finding something that solves both is really challenging. It's not straightforward for the government to just step in and hand out money to organisations that aren't part of the public realm. So it's tricky on all fronts.
Do you think? I mean, if the government were to take it over, there's an interesting question here about its control of the curriculum too. So do we think Nick Gibb at the DfE is going to be keen on commissioning basically teachers making Tracy Island and doing group work and sitting on round tables and that stuff?
So we've worked really closely with the DfE for the past however many months we're on now, over the past year. They have, to their absolute credit, been superb at trusting the teachers and their schools that we work with to take a look at the curriculum and give teachers the autonomy to decide, what works, what doesn't work, what they should do in their lessons. Even if they had the capacity to intervene on 10,000 individual lessons, they haven't. And, they've continued to very thoughtfully and carefully respect that this is a grassroots organisation that was set up by teachers to help other teachers, and have, stepped in to help and support, with paying that hosting bill, which, without them, again, I can list 20 people off, right? But without the department, we wouldn't exist. Without the Reach Foundation, we wouldn't exist. Without the teachers or the communications experts or the technologists, we wouldn't exist. And that's what makes finding this solution, really challenging. It's okay doing it for a short period of time during a pandemic, but making that a kind of sustainable longer term thing is tough.
Right. I just say for our comments, Eileen Field, who is from Acorn Digital Learning, it's a digital school for SEN kids with autistic spectrum conditions. She says it found amazing outcomes for using live digital teaching with SEN, delivered the same as mainstream lessons. I see with closed captioning and signing, we're able to teach our students to move through and use the tools for better learning opportunities. But I think goes back to this point that actually the uses of what Oak has done over the last year may be broader than anyone could have thought a year ago.
It's the teachers that came up with them, right? We just put this thing out there, and then we get these emails in saying, "Oh, hey, we're using it for cover. Oh, hey, we're using it for homework. Oh, hey, we didn't set out to do any of those things." I suppose to leave you with one of the most touching emails we had was from a grandma in Beirut who said, "Thank you, for providing these for us. We are educating our granddaughter at home because her school was destroyed in the blast at the port, and we didn't have an alternative, and now she's doing lessons with you." Just like we all sort of thousand flowers bloom. All of these things just keep coming in of creative ways that teachers use things when you just give them the tools and trust them to crack on.
So I should thank you, Matt, for that hour. That's really fascinating, and actually in a pretty grim year, like potentially a nice outcome, as you say, like in the way that tube strikes lead to people maybe finding new ways to get to work. We may be finding new ways to teach. I should say this is just one part of the Festival of Education. There are other keynotes still to come in this series. Kate Green, MP, the Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Johnny Ball, Will Self, Amanda Spillman, Rachel D'Souza, Kevin Collins, Carol Shepherd, Daniel Willingham, lots of people who I'm really would be keen to hear from. So with that, I'll say thank you to Matt. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the people who contributed questions. And I'll see you all soon.
It's my great honour to welcome you all.
It is a very prestigious award. It means the world to me.
They have great senses of humour.
I like to reveal parts of history to them, for I love making history come alive.
They are some of the best people that you can come across.
To help them open their hearts.
I always come back to this quote. How can we be role models to learners if we're not learners ourselves?
It's quite useful to get out of our bubbles, not our COVID ones, and sort of see what else is out there.
By sharing best practice, we can see the whole picture. We can see what really matters.
One of the biggest brains around.
It's easy to forget how much has to happen behind the front line.
As a global schools group, Cognita educates over 55,000 students across 12 countries. We're proud to be Wellbeing Partner at this year's Festival of Education, and we want to share the work that we're doing to prioritise children's well-being. This starts with a clear understanding of what well-being is. We looked at the evidence and created a simple Be Well charter that everyone can use day to day. It gives a clear definition of well-being and then focuses on the specific contributors that influence it. Discover our full Be Well Charter video and other resources to use with your students and families at cognita.com.
I really try to not look at myself as just a science teacher. I feel like as a teacher, it's very important to help students grow and develop outside of your lessons. A single teacher believing in you and really believing in you. One teacher doing that can have a large impact, but if you have one or two or three all telling you that and really, really believing in it, it makes you feel like you can achieve anything in the world, honestly.